We are joined this afternoon by Austin Cindric, driver of the number 2 Menards Ford Mustang in the NASCAR Cup Series, headed off to Talladega this weekend. If you've got a question for Austin, raise your hand. We'll get to as many as we can over the next 15 minutes here. So let's kick it off here, Austin. We'll just go right into questions. We'll start with Rob Tiongson. Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for joining us today, Austin. A couple of questions, if I may. Obviously the Ford performance teams have been really good at Superspeedway racing, and obviously you're coming off the Daytona 500 victory. So first of all, what is it about Team Penske and Ford that's such a great combination at these big Superspeedway races?
Yeah, obviously it takes a lot of execution and sometimes positioning and sometimes luck at the Speedway races to obviously be there at the end and have a shot to win the race. But one of those pieces is obviously, having fast cars and I think the engine shop puts a lot of effort into these types of races as well as our team, whether if that's from a strategy standpoint, a driving standpoint. I feel like, our 2 senior drivers, Ryan and Joey, are two of the best at this type of racing. So, you look at Talladega, I think 6 of the 12 wins Penske has at Talladega are from Joey and Ryan. So those guys are obviously really capable of getting that done and learning from that and understanding, how I can best do my part. And I think you collaborate that with a lot of really quality cars in the Ford camp. I think that's why you see a lot of Fords at the front. And I think we work well together, and it's obviously proven success.
Certainly. My last question is, obviously we're a quarter of the way through this Cup season. You've got the Daytona win, but what would you give yourself grade-wise for the first 9 races and these next 9 races ahead?
I think some things have been better than I thought, and other things have been, probably more challenged. Like the funny thing walking out of the track last week is that I don't think anyone in this group or this room or probably under the roof of this building would have thought that my Bristol dirt race I would have run legitimately better than I did at Phoenix. So I think those things show that there's a lot of changes and a lot of newness and a lot of things, a lot of moving parts and a lot of challenges. As a rookie in the Cup Series, kind of knew that going in, but it's one of those deals that you just have to be able to learn and adapt and best prepare yourself possible. So I'm not sure I'd give myself a grade, but I do think there's been a lot of progress, whether if that's on the racetrack or off the racetrack, with the team trying to build something. So that's been a fun process to be a part of. Every day is not easy, but it's certainly rewarding on the good days.
Thanks, AC. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, man.
All right, thanks, Rob. I want to go to Bob Pockris because I know he's in the airport traveling. So, Bob, I don't know if your connection is good, but if you've got a question for Austin, why don't you go ahead and ask?
All right. I think you got me.
Yeah, I got you.
I'm curious. Everybody says, you win a race, get in the playoffs. With all the winners this year, are you looking at points at all among winners? Do you feel like pressure that you're going to get a second win?
Yeah, obviously a second win certainly cancels out a lot of that conversation. The thing I do look at from our standpoint is that we're above the top 16 in points. We've been solidly above the top 16 in points. So whether it's, you look at it, if, okay, everybody in the playoff picture has a win, okay, we will still have more points than those that are not in the top 16. So from that standpoint, I think we just have to keep operating as usual. Yeah, I completely agree. A second win pretty much cancels out anything from keeping us out of the playoffs. And obviously that's what you try and do every week. But it's certainly a conversation that's worth looking at. And we can't just go all out and not care about points because points are certainly important, but it's also important for lining you up in the playoff picture beforehand. So I'm not sure it changes much other than some days could be maybe more pressure filled but a lot of the best ways to cancel that out, like you said, is to win another race.
And how much in preparation for tracks that you're going to that are also in the playoffs, do you guys talk about playoffs?
I think we work on a week-to-week basis. Obviously, you look at Martinsville and Phoenix as 2 obviously incredibly important races to the schedule, whether if that's, for me, for the organization, for my teammates. Obviously, I've got 2 teammates that are championship capable drivers. And I think those races are really important to them. And I think as a company, we have to recognize that if we want to chance to win a championship, we got to be good at least those two racetracks specifically. So I think that's important for us as a company. So From that standpoint, yes. And from honestly the standpoint of all tracks that you'll return to, you think about the challenges every team and driver has been faced with going to these tracks with very limited practice, with very limited knowledge on the car. I can just look at, having the 3 short tracks really back to back to back, understanding the tire a little bit better, understanding, even though things don't really transfer from Martinsville to Richmond, like you can still take things away from those racetracks and take trends away. So I think everybody's looking for the smallest amount of information they can to try and progress their stuff forward. So I think we're all looking forward to going back to tracks a second time.
All right. Thanks, Bob. Let's go in order here. Dustin Long, you're up next. Go ahead.
Thanks. Hey, Austin, with your prep work for this weekend, are you looking at video from Atlanta? Are you looking at Daytona, or are you looking more primarily at last year's Talladega races because it's that track? Or how are you looking at, what are you looking at in terms of your video preparation? What races?
Yeah, pretty much wrapped up all my film prep for the week, and whether if it's with my spotter or the team, looking at Daytona. I mean, there's so many unknowns going to Daytona. Kind of have to remind yourself of not only the car and the things that you learn throughout speed weeks, but also the fact that Talladega is a different racetrack, still being able to keep it in mind, but also Daytona, you're going to race different because everyone kind of looks at it as an exhibition. So, there's a lot of times in the race where guys will be making, moves that aren't necessarily for points or trying to win stages or a lag back, or, a lot of the final stages of the race, everyone was saving fuel. So you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt. So I would say that Talladega, and now that the season started, there's a lot of people that probably look at it, even to Bob's question about, oh, well, Austin, you have 1 win, you'd really want 2. Well, of course, but there's a lot of guys in the field that really want 1 win because they see that as their only way to make it in the playoffs. We've got so many 1 winner. We've only got 1 guy with multiple wins. So from that standpoint, I would see this being maybe a desperate race already, with business picking up in the win column. So I definitely look at that as far as a mentality standpoint from my competitors, even in some stages for myself. Obviously, everyone's got their own motivations to win the race, but I look at it. Talladega certainly has different offsets than Daytona. And handling usually doesn't come into play as much, but I'm looking forward to building off of what I learned at Daytona. Obviously, we had a lot of strengths, and try to build on that.
And when you look at the Daytona film, when you've done that, what at the end of the day, when you had more time to look at it, study it, what did you do right? And when you were looking at that film, were there times you're looking at that going, why did I just make that move? Or why did I do that?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to have a perfect plate race. I think there's always things that you can look at, and you try. The hardest part for me, like watching film, especially when it's races that I'm in, is hard not to just watch yourself. You watch the race and you go, oh, I remember this, I remember that. Like, oh, this guy was an idiot. Like you try and remember the race that you were in, but the bigger picture of like doing the film study is to watch other moves other people make and different trends. Like, Kyle Busch was leading the lane, for example, and understanding, looking at the data, looking at the film, okay, what's he doing to try and keep the lead? What are other guys playing with? How does that evolve throughout the race as people learn things? So those are the things that you kind of have to pause the video and look at and understand. And it's a lot of information and trying to figure out what the things that are most important to look at and think about, and but all in the same time, like I said before, keeping an open mind is important, because I think with this car, like I feel like there was a pretty good science to it with the Xfinity car, if I'm being honest. Whereas I feel like with this car, it's much more dependent on what's happening in the pack versus what's happening with the air.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Dustin. Let's go to Jenna Fryer. Hey, Jenna.
Hey there, thanks. Hey, Austin.
Hey.
I'm curious, you just said to Dustin that Sunday could be a desperate race. So how as a driver do you prepare for that, knowing that others might be doing desperate things?
It's a great question. I'm not sure you really can. You're kind of just more of a passenger. You might just tighten up your belts more before every restart, but other than that, that's about it. I mean, you can understand and you can maybe expect guys to make mistakes. Sometimes when the pressure is high, that people make more mistakes. But at the same time, expecting big blocks, expecting people to take runs when they have them. those types of things are probably what you can do to at least, prepare ahead of time as a driver to maybe anticipate, other people's moves. But otherwise, I'm not promising more wrecks, but that it's usually the late blocks. I mean, similar to honestly what you saw kind of at the end of the second duel there. These cars are very, very challenging to block runs, and they're very challenging to take pushes. But I think there's going to be a lot of pushing. So I think it's a lot of the normal stuff you see, especially your kind of Daytona end of the year race. But like I said before, I think there's a lot of people noticing that there's a lot of wins, and you have to win to make it in the playoffs with the way things are trending at the moment.
And I wanted to ask you about you. You have developed into a really good super speedway racer really quickly. How did that happen?
I'm not exactly sure there's one moment or one defining moment. When I would say when I first started racing stock cars, and the mentality is that you go in, you kind of watch things on TV. That's kind of all you really know about it. And there's no other discipline in racing that you can really relate to speedway racing. Like, yeah, you can be a dirt racer and, go to Bristol and, think of some certain things, or, I can go to, Road America and apply some certain things, or even Martinsville. Like, there's nothing on the planet that's even remotely close to what we do on speedways, bump drafting, all those certain things. And I feel like nothing really prepares you for that other than going out there and doing it. So I think the more laps I got, kind of an obvious statement, but the more laps I got at it, the more comfortable I got. And the biggest challenge for me is like, okay, I understand how to work in a pack and what to do to get myself forward and the smarter decisions to make, and obviously understanding your competition. But it's really hard to lead. It's really hard to change your mindset like a light switch, because the moment you're in the lead, you're having to manage gaps, you're having to do certain things you weren't having to do in the pack. And I think your relationship with your spotter is incredibly important. The last couple of years, I've gotten to work with Colin Presley. He and I developed a great relationship, really great communication. And I think that mentality for me is carried over working with Doug Campbell. I think he's been doing an exceptional job, not just on the speedways, but obviously winning the 500 together really in our first race was pretty cool. But that was, I would say, in large credit to the amount of time we spent together. He came to a lot of my pre-race meetings in Xfinity when we knew we were going to work together. And I spent a lot of Sundays last year watching races from the spotter stand. So I think that relationship is pretty important in being able to knock out the communication.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. Let's go to David Hoffman. Go ahead, David.
Hey, thank you. Austin, how much of Daytona can you really bring into Dega just because of, just with the new car setup wise?
I think setup wise, I'll be interested to see how much handling does or doesn't matter. I feel like you had times in the race where the bottom lane would fade at Daytona, even though it was probably the most dominant lane, for restarts and early run. Whereas Talladega, you don't really see like the off of turn 4 slides that the guys usually have at Daytona. Granted, it's going to be high 80s, low 90s while we're in Talladega. Obviously, awesome weather to watch a race, but handling wise, interested to see how this tire reacts to the changing conditions. But otherwise, I look at Talladega as more of a speed racetrack than a handling racetrack. Some people would argue different, but it's kind of how it's always been for me. But otherwise, car wise, I'm interested to see where we qualify. Interested to see what gains we're able to make from just having the cars longer. I think everyone's kind of in that same boat. So be interested to see who's done more homework after kind of the first event of the year.
And final question, just through the first quarter of the year, how have you seen yourself grow just with not only being a rookie into the series, but just with having to learn this new car? Obviously, it is new for everybody.
I think you certainly recognize that the funny thing is you have guys that, say, oh, this is the easiest year to be a rookie. And in some ways, I think that's based off of the fact that everyone's having to learn quite a lot. And there's a lot of newness with the cars. And that doesn't mean that I don't have habits that I'm having to unlearn as well. My whole basis of how to drive a stock car has been in an Xfinity car. That's pretty much it. I had 1 year in the trucks, but it's pretty much 4 years of Xfinity racing. And that's what I've defined racing on an oval, period. So I think some of those things, it puts me in the same boat as just about everybody else. And then you've got to stack on top of that, what it means to be a rookie in the Cup Series and racing against the best guys in the business. So some days are better than others. Some days are worse than others. And I think it's just a process. And in some ways it is nice with the new car because there are a lot of very humanizing days for a lot of different drivers in the field. You know, some days you'll be back racing for 20th with Martin Truex Jr. Like, this guy's a Cup champion. This guy is expecting to be in the hunt for this championship. I mean, he came really, really close to win the championship last year, and they have bad days because everyone's learning. I mean, the highs, everyone's having highs and lows. And that's why I feel like the points are still really close. That's why we're having new winners every weekend. It's challenging for sure. And it's just about minimizing those bad days and learning from them and applying them to make the next day better.
Awesome. Thanks, Austin. Good luck this weekend.
Well, Austin, we appreciate the time. It's funny because I was listening to Jeremy on the radio earlier today, and he's actually saying that your car this weekend for Talladega is actually the car you had at COTA. And it just speaks to this new car and just how it can be transformed from track to track, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a special track for a special car.
By design.
All right, my friend. Well, appreciate the time and best of luck this weekend at Talladega.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.